Yeah. Good evening. Nice to see everyone here. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. Must be a bad television night, so that's a good thing. All right. Um, Before we get started, if I could encourage you to silence your phones or any electronic devices you might have so you don't scare yourself if something goes ring, ring. Um, I've got a couple of remarks to try to read just so I don't miss anything, but um, this is an informal conversation, so it doesn't have the formalities of a council meeting. So we are going to get to listen, learn, ask questions, hear answers, and share. So let's look forward to that. Greetings, Glendora community members. Welcome and thank you for expressing your deep interest and the opportunity to learn where we're at in the process of creating a vision toward how we might be able to meet the market needs for additional housing demands while we work through long current city zoning ordinances with identified site inventory and possibilities to make new housing for new residents. I'm your mayor, David Fredendall. I'm honored to conduct this conversation with you. I'm joined with my colleague, Councilmember Mendel Thompson, and together we will address your enthusiastic, oftentimes passionate desire to get the full and honest details of the Glendora Station Area Vision Plan. This opportunity will allow us to get the history of how we got to this point. It did not happen overnight. And along with how we may be able to achieve the potential solutions to work within the existing zoning and incorporate with local choice and control many of the requirements that have been set upon us by the wonderful state of California, while working to uphold the values that you all passionately feel are Glendora. I encourage all of us to exercise respect, and seeing and knowing many of the faces here, I would expect none less. Formulate your questions and comments and take in and listen to the vast amount of information that will be shared. Every time I hear it, I learn more. So there's more than you're going to understand and learn and retain in one chance just tonight, but there's opportunities. We will have a chance to have conversation, let you ask questions. We'll get answers from our experts, and we'll have some good, respectful dialogue. The event is streaming live on the city's YouTube channel right now. And this event is also being recorded and will be posted to the city website as soon as possible, within probably later this week, so that if something comes up that you didn't remember, you do get that chance to go back and review it and maybe get the answer you missed. And if someone is that you know wanted to be here but was not able to, encourage them, they can go on to the website and again view this opportunity. So allow us all in the room to go back and watch and review and miss those important items. Joining Mr. Thompson tonight and myself are city staff experts on this history and the vision plan. They will be making the presentation and fielding many of the questions tonight, as they are indeed the experts. The goal this evening is to educate, share, listen, address concerns and questions with the respect that is uniquely Glendora. Go from here with the real facts. I will ask that we hold our questions until the conclusion of the presentation, at which time we will open the floor for questions and discussion, with the intent being to address all of the questions. In the event that a complete answer is not available, as we may not have the particular fact that you want answered, we will be doing a summary of the questions and answers, and we will post all to the website so that everybody can go on the website and get the answer to that unasked question or unanswered question. Tonight, I would like to introduce our staff. We have our amazing city manager, Mr. Adam Raymond, our city attorney, Danny Aylshire, assistant city manager, Moises Lopez, director of community development, Mr. Jeff Kugel, city planner, Mr. Mark Carnahan, and principal planner, Hans Friedel. So before we go into the presentation, I would like to extend the opportunity to my colleague, Mr. Thompson, to make a share. Mendel?
Well, thank you for being here. You've given up a lot. The Dodgers and Reds are opening the series. So it's going to be a team effort here, get the team to be done by 8 o'clock, because then we can get home to see the most important part of any baseball game, the end. So hopefully things will go well. I just want to say thank you for taking your time, your very important time, to actually be here and hear truth and hear the facts. Now, you may not like the truth and you may not like the facts, and you might be shocked to hear the fact that David and I don't like all of the truth that we hear, because there's a lot of laws that the state is coming down on us with, and we don't like them. But I think it's important that we have a chance to listen, to question, to understand, to converse, because at the end of the day, I think most of us are aligned that we want our city to be the city that we've moved here for, that we work, live, play in, that we love, that we want managed growth, managed parking and traffic and all of that. We often hear that we want more places to eat and shop, and the schools need more kids. So there's a tension there that we all share. And I say we all, because the council shares that too, because we live here too, and we drive the same roads that you do. So I just want to say once again, thank you for taking your time, for being here, for asking well thought out thoughts that you have, questions that you have. Give us a chance to answer those. And as David said, if we don't know, then we will say that, and we will get back and make sure that you know. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mendel. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Principal Planner Hans Friedel. Go easy on him. He's got a lot to give us, and then he'll be able to answer many of those questions or reemphasize some of the points along with the rest of the team as well. If, in fact, during the question and answer process, you have a reluctance to want to use this microphone, it will work the room and come to you. We do have cards that we can pass around or get to you, and you can write your question. Please write so we can read it. You're not doctors, some of you are, but write so we can read it, and we will get those questions answered either off the postcard or through the roving microphone. So thank you with that, and with that, Hans, take it away.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and good evening, and thank you all for being here. My name is Hans Friedel again, and I'm the Principal Planner in Community Development. Make sure I get this right here. I've been asked to give a presentation tonight on planning and development, especially related to the area around Glendora Station. Again, I'm joined by my colleagues up here, and at the conclusion of it, we'll be able to answer questions or have a conversation and field those questions. So, again, this is, as was mentioned, this is going to be kind of a deep dive with a lot of different high level, but also a lot of different subject matter. So I appreciate your patience as I go through it. So why are we here tonight? I think there's really three reasons, for this meeting and guiding this presentation. And that's one, community concerns that were shared over future development in and around the Glendora Station area, particularly height and density of development. Questions that were raised over what the Glendora Station Area Vision Plan is and isn't, and the process that led up to its creation and adoption. This is also an opportunity to provide an overview of California housing law, which we'll do, and the city's planning process and processes related to development and housing in the city. Pretty picture here. So how development works in California and by nature Glendora. So we'll start with an overview of that and by extension us. So every city, the high level things, every city must have a general plan and adopt it. This is kind of like the constitution for growth and development of a city, or in our case, Glendora. California state law mandates that all cities and counties adopt a comprehensive long-term general plan. It acts as a blueprint for future development, and it requires cities and counties to incorporate 7 mandatory elements. And there's some optional ones, but the mandatory ones are land use, circulation, housing. We'll come back to that quite a bit. Conservation, open space, noise, and public safety. Glendora's plan, called the Glendora 2025 plan, coincidentally, and land use element were last comprehensively updated in 2006, so about 20 years ago. And it still is the foundational legal document for all local land use decisions, and all zoning, subdivision approvals, and other development activities must be consistent with its goals and policies. So the next thing I'll talk about here is the housing element. So again, it was one of those 7 mandatory elements. Of particular interest is the housing element tonight, and particularly relevant. So California's housing element is a mandatory 8-year planning document in which each local government, Glendora in our case, general plan that outlines strategies to meet the community's housing needs, including its share of the state's regional housing assessment. The element must identify housing conditions, analyze needs across all income levels, and establish goals, policies, and programs to facilitate the development of housing in that jurisdiction. We are in what's called the 6th cycle, and that number you may hear the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, I'll talk about that in a minute, arena, which means our housing element covers a period of from 2021 to 2029. So we're currently a little bit more than halfway through it, and as you can see, it was adopted in 2022. So importantly, the housing element must demonstrate that the city has created a regulatory framework paving the way for the creation of its regional housing needs assessment. For us in Glendora, we were assigned by the state around 2,300 housing units. I think the number is 2276 at selected housing sites that we have to select around the city. Around 1,000 of these are to be built at sites within a half mile of the Glendora rail station. You know, this is a state mandate. So the housing elements have to be adopted by the local council and certified by the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. Ours went back and forth, as is common, a number of times with the state of California before it could be agreed to and we could, negotiate and get adopted. It's a difficult process of back and forth negotiations. The state has to review and certify the housing element for it to become compliant. And, in addition to the local jurisdiction adopting it, has to have conversations at a, planning commission and city council level about the document itself and the commitments in it. So it's a difficult process for many jurisdictions, including our own. That's the housing element. So if you have a general plan and housing element, then you can have zoning and subdivision standards. And the main ways that the general plan and housing elements are implemented is through the zoning code, implementation or application of the zoning code and subdivision standards, which a lot of us have probably heard about zoning and subdivisions. I'll define them. But they're enabled and regulated by state laws as well. Local zoning ordinances in California are city-level rules regulating the use and development of land, including what can be built and how. And they're tied to geographic areas in a map, and I'll show you that in a minute. Zoning now, interestingly, must be objective for residential developments, and that means that it shall include statements like shall and must and actual requirements, and not things like should or consider this, etc. So it's more the state's further limited sort of that level where cities can have meetings and discuss aspects of a development. Is basically kind of cut and dry now. Subdivision standards. So Subdivision Map Act is California state law that regulates the division of land into smaller parcels for sale, requiring local government approval and the creation of final and parcel maps. This goes with zoning. Lot size is one way development is regulated. So, bottom line here is in terms of the zoning part of it, if a multifamily development really any type is a permitted use in a certain zone, we can't stop it. We would get in trouble if we did. So it's by right use if that's the case. So that goes to kind of development review pathway. So how does stuff get approved for development in different parts of the city? I think a common misconception is that planners, um, even maybe elected officials decide what goes where at a very specific level. It's kind of like I think the gladiator reference comes up here where they do like a thumbs up or thumbs down if the gladiator lives or dies. We decide where Starbucks goes, where restaurants go, things like that. At the long range planning level, general plan level, this can happen by zoning certain areas of the city a certain way to allow certain uses or not. But at the sort of development application permit level, if someone wants to build something and it meets the zoning standards, then the market is what drives and dictates what gets built where, not us, or elected officials at that point either. There's really two review process pathways that a development application for something new goes through for its approvals, be it a restaurant or a 4-story apartment building or whatever. And that is one. Discretionary is one option, and the other path is non-discretionary. Sometimes you'll hear it called ministerial approvals. A discretionary process involves some sort of hearing before a deciding board like planning commission, or sometimes it would be director level ones too for smaller things, and sometimes city council. Currently in our zoning, a large multifamily development would go through a public hearing before a planning commission for what's called a development plan review, or like a site plan. But that's only to confirm that it meets the city's objective design standards, which we're working on, or which ones it are. And the hearing cannot reduce the development density or allowed height of a development. It can't impose things that the state says it can't or are inconsistent with state law. Like, for example, minimum parking requirements within a half-mile of transit, which I'll talk about in a minute too. This all has changed over the years as the state of California has increasingly required development types that they would like to see, which are housing, to go through non-discretionary processes instead of to hearings in front of commissions and councils and hearing officers, etc. Per state law and our zoning, many housing-related applications and developments are non-discretionary. That is to say, like 10-unit or less multifamily developments, single-family houses, ADUs, which we have a lot of. They just go straight to permit, building permit at the counter, and they have to meet our standards. We don't decide where they go and that sort of thing. They meet our standards, they go to building permit, then they get reviewed for health and safety and the building code. They have to meet objective standards and for that zone, and this might be setbacks, height limits, things like that. So this is going to be kind of a very high overview of new housing laws and what's changed in California, and there's a whole lot. So California has a proclaimed housing crisis, which is a deep-rooted, complex issue of insufficient housing supply and severe affordability problems. In fact, it's been deemed a matter of statewide concern at the state level. And for example, just some stats here. In 2024, 2 metropolitan areas in Texas, it's Houston and Dallas, approved more housing permits than the entire state of California did. With California's per capita permitting rate much lower than Texas, in Colorado, Florida, other mega states per 1,000 or million people, however you want to do it. And California, bottom line, is like the most expensive state for multifamily housing production in pretty much every cost category that the research we looked at considered. So, there's longer production timelines. They're associated with higher costs. There's labor issues. It takes longer to bring a project to completion in California, almost 22 months longer than the average time it requires in Texas. It takes like twice as long and twice as much to build way fewer things here. Because of that, a lot of other factors, housing is really expensive. Estimates vary quite wildly, but according to some different analyses, California would have had to have built millions, up to 5 million by one we saw, new housing units over the last decade to have averted this housing crisis that they've deemed we have. What can be said with certainty, though, is that we have actual numbers on this that are specific. The statewide median sale price for an existing single-family home is just shy of $900,000. In LA County, it's about $1 million. Same in Glendora. Year to date, there's been just about 100,000 permits issued in California for new housing. Of course, that takes time to build them and all that sort of stuff, which I talked about. At current mortgage rates, even with like 20% down, you're looking at about $6,000 a month for your mortgage. And that doesn't include utilities, insurance, stuff like that. So, an average person making, even 100,000 per year really can't afford to buy a house, here or anywhere near current interest rates that we have. So to address this, the state has passed over 100 housing bills in the last decade. There are more on the horizon. And to put this in context, this year, 2,833 bills were proposed, 1,400 have passed. These are all topics, not just housing, but 418 have already been signed, one has been vetoed, and 805 currently sit on the governor's desk as of last week. I'm sure some of those have moved or something's happened to them. But so that's kind of a very high level overview of the sort of environment. Here's an overview of some of the specific housing laws that really affect us quite a lot. So we, obviously can't talk about all of these laws or bills that would be here all tonight and tomorrow, but I can give a high level overview of a few of them. And again, I want to mention, and this is on the city's website, that City Council, the Glendora City Council, took positions against in letter form to the state nearly all of these laws that I'm going to talk about, and those letters are on the city's website. So first one, and probably the most important thing, is the Housing Accountability Act. It's a landmark California law designed to promote infill development by speeding up these housing approvals, which I talked about. The act was passed a long time ago, 1982, in recognition of the lack of housing, including emergency shelters, and stating that it was a critical statewide concern or problem. It empowers the state of California to limit the ability of local jurisdictions or agencies, cities, to restrict the development of new housing, and legalizes the builder's remedy process to ameliorate or relieve violations of the law by local governments. The act was really modified and strengthened by subsequent amendments in like 1990, 2017, and then most recently 2024. So the Housing Accountability Act limits the city's ability to deny or reduce compliant housing. It requires stronger findings to say no. Also the basis for the builder's remedy, which I just mentioned, and that is a legal mechanism that allows developers to bypass local zoning and land use restrictions to build housing projects, especially those including affordable components, when a city or county fails to comply with the state housing element law. So if you don't get your housing element, which I talked about, adopted and certified within a certain time, then a developer can invoke this builder's remedy and then bypass your local zoning and build the density that's allowed. So the next one is SB 330, and SB means state bill. So Housing Crisis Act. SB 330 prohibits local jurisdictions from enacting new laws that would have the effect of reducing the legal limit on new housing within their borders. So basically what this does is it prevents downzoning. So caps most hearings, so the number of hearings something can go through at 5, and locks in rules at preliminary applications. So it is extended to 2030 and later again. So what downzoning is that's an action by a local government that says if the current zoning allows 30 units per acre, we want to rezone it to allow 20 units per acre or something like that. Or take something from 4 stories and say we want to change the zoning to 3. You can't do it unless you make up that density or that development intensity somewhere else in the city. So it's really hard to do that. SB 35 and SB 423, and again, this has the year, so these are 2000. These are all pretty recent, as you can see. SB 35 provides a streamlined approval process for certain multifamily housing projects in California that have not met their housing, in cities that haven't met their housing goals. While SB 423 extends and significantly expands the provisions of SB 35, making the streamlining permit process more enforced, expanding it to include coastal zones, and revising labor standards for projects that utilize market rate units. SB 423 also clarifies the ministerial approval process, or non-discretionary that I mentioned, restricting the role of planning commissions and mandating timely decisions by planning directors and staff based on, again, this objective standards for affordable projects. Includes some exemptions from the California Environmental Quality Act as well. AB 2011, SB 6, that opens commercial zone sites to housing. So now, this AB 2011 Assembly Bill provides by right streamlining for qualifying affordable mixed income projects on commercial corridors. So affordable apartments can go in commercial zones by right. SB 6 allows housing in office retail zones with, again, labor provisions. SB 4 is yet another one. It's called, sometimes they call it Yes in God's Backyard. and that's by right non-discretionary approval for 100% affordable developments on faith-based and nonprofit college-owned land included. So, church site, a lot of churches have been struggling. They can be redeveloped, or portions of their site can be redeveloped to have housing under AB4. And these are state, again, state laws. All right, one more slide of these laws. Density bonus law is a big one that gets talked about a lot. It's a huge, complicated law, but if project includes on-site affordable units at some level, it can basically, the idea here is exceed the base density and request incentives or concessions, waivers of development standards, where the standards would physically preclude or limit the bonus uses, so, or units rather. What they often use it for is to get something higher or get more units on a site. You can also get out of certain objective standards if it doesn't allow you to have the density that you would be entitled to based on the number of affordable units, which we'll talk about what that means in a minute. Recent updates to a whole list here, which is AB 2345, 1763, 1287. They increase these bonuses and add special bonuses near transit areas. So we're kind of getting back to why we needed to have a plan for this area, especially for, again, affordable projects. SB 9 ADU law, many of you probably have heard of that, is that really for single family homeowners, but also some multifamily developments. And this allows up to 4 total dwelling units on eligible single family zone lots, effectively ended single family zoning in California. Finally, AB 2097, cities cannot require minimum parking for developments within a half-mile of transit. So we can't impose our parking standards if you're within a half-mile radius of the Glendora station, is what that means here. The last one I put TBD. As of last week, and I think today still, is this bill on the governor's desk called SB 79. You may have heard about it in the news. And this will make it faster and easier to build multifamily housing near transit stops, like train and rapid bus lines. Again, in our case, talking about the train station, it makes it legal for more homes to build in these areas. The city, Glendora, has sent 3 letters opposing the bill to the state. The bill's idea is to address 2 crises at once from the state's perspective: the state's long-term housing shortage and the financial situation of its public transit agencies. By allowing in taller and denser development, the legislation is meant to pave the way for more apartments in areas closer to jobs and transit, services, that sort of thing. By centering that development around public transit, it's meant to steer more people away from cars and towards buses and trains as their primary way of getting around. Glendora would be a tier 2 city in this draft bill, and there's a lot of things for us to still kind of learn about it because it's been kind of amended and revised as it's gone through the legislative process. But the main idea is it sort of like wraps a lot of these other things into one bill umbrella, and so it would allow up to 65-foot high by right buildings within 1/4 mile of the light rail station at between 80 and 100 dwelling units per acre, within a bigger 1/2 mile radius of the station or platform, 55 feet high and 80 to 100 dwelling units per acre. Again, parcels directly next to the station can add 20 feet of height and 40 dwelling units per acre. So the parcels that like touch the station can get really quite tall. A big caveat though is it's, again, to be determined whether the market conditions in Glendora would even support development that high right next to the station. Oftentimes developers come to us with applications for things that are like below the required density and are lower. So it does give transit agencies more authority to bypass local regulations on land they own. And, again, we don't really fully understand the impacts of this yet because it hasn't passed yet as of earlier today. So what all this means kind of in plain language, it's a whole lot of stuff, I know, and again, there's hundreds, so I maybe 20 I just talked about. To summarize these, developers can build oftentimes higher and taller developments near transit. Cities have had less and less they can do to prevent that over the years, and in fact, they can't even do things that reduce the allowed zoning densities or height, or make something that allows residential not allow residential without making it up somewhere else. So these developments can also modify local standards and in some cases bypass them completely, like parking height, etc., if there's a certain number of affordable units in them or they're within a certain distance of transit. The way the state sort of, enforces this is kind of interesting. So you may have heard of HCD. So HCD is the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. Their enforcement wing is the California Housing Accountability Unit, or HAU. It was established in 2021, so pretty recently, to enforce state housing laws, with a significant expansion of its powers in 2024, last year, to ensure compliance with the Housing Accountability Act, which I talked about, and other laws promoting housing development. Their enforcement wing, HCD, they are the enforcement ring of HCD. We kind of think of them as the housing police in California, but they have the power now to enforce on local jurisdictions penalties, including civil penalties, fines for failing to adopt a compliant housing element, a certain amount of money per day, et cetera. Builder's remedy they enforce, which we talked about, and their fines can, going to court. The issues that cities can face can be everything. The penalties can be up to and including a loss of local authority or receivership in the most extreme cases when cities fight the state. So they just take over your ability to permit developments in your city, and stuff gets built whether you like it or not. As of September 2025, some stats: the Housing Accountability Unit maintains this dashboard with sort of updated statistics. According to them, they've unlocked over 10,000 housing units in the state, including 3,328 affordable units. They've sent over 1,000 accountability letters, provided technical assistance on 828 cases, and closed over 2,300 cases. Many cities, and you've probably heard about this in the news, have challenged the state's housing laws, and those will end up in court. In nearly all cases, pretty much all, the cities have lost. Huntington Beach is on the news for that quite frequently. They've spent millions of dollars of their citizens' money fighting the state, and they've lost, including in federal. And some of these court cases that cities have lost are in federal appeals courts too. So it's been, educated up the process. So that's kind of the background. How do we get to the Glendora Station Vision Plan? So that sets up the stuff we had to do and we have to do as a city. So the Glendora Station Area Vision Plan, it's kind of a long title. It all started with the city's adopted housing element when it got certified. As I've discussed, that committed the city to create a regulatory framework to accommodate those 2,236 or 2,300 roughly housing units across the city, including around 1,000 units within that 1/2 mile of the Glendora Station at the 10 sites. The number of units in the vision plan is consistent with the adopted housing elements. Not more, not less, it's consistent. Importantly, the housing element prohibits any reduction in that residential density below 80% of the maximum density at a housing site. So the underlying zoning is for 3 stories and 30 units per acre almost everywhere around the station. I'll show a map here in a minute. So that 80% would be 24 units per acre. So if someone think the takeaway there, and that's kind of like, sort of abstract stuff to think about. But if someone came in and wanted to build, single-story homes or 12 units per acre on a site, we couldn't even allow that because we can't allow anything that goes below 80% of our approved density. So in terms of some of the local plans that fed into the Glendora Station Plan, there's quite a few things that went through public processes, Planning Commission, City Council, and quite a few meetings of other documents and plans that went sort of steered this plan and kind of set the stage for it. So the first one I'll talk about is the 2023 to 2025 strategic plan. So the city adopted this in May of 2023. And as its very first goal, it was called, the first goal of it was implementing strategic economic development. Objective 4 to that goal was to create a vision and development plan for the Village Gold Line area, is what we call it. This also includes a task to complete conceptual development plans for future housing and commercial developments in that area. The city then, has a new one. So 2025 to 2027, it's called the City Council Goals and Action Plan, and the city adopted that earlier this year. And it includes as goal 1, suburban living, and it was adopted after a series of public meetings going back to December of 2024. And again, adoption was earlier in 25. But this is to foster intentional urbanization through increased targeted. So one of its goals is to foster intentional urbanization through increased targeted housing density, revitalize commercial areas, and enhance services and infrastructure that supports a livable community for all. Specifically, it includes outcome 1, which is increased targeted housing density and housing options at all income levels. And action item 1.3 of that is adoption of the Glendora of the station area development vision in Q3 of this year, which is what the timeline for the Glendora Station Plan was on. So the plan itself, that's kind of the stuff, that's how we got there. And I mentioned the housing element and the strategic plans. The Glendora Station Area Vision Plan is really a vision for, it started with a planning study looking at this area around a half mile of the Glendora Station. This area was then reduced to focus on the areas most likely to develop, and therefore excluded, we excluded most single-family neighborhoods, um, you know, things that are unlikely to change, and also try to preserve some existing commercial sites. The grocery stores. You'll notice Albertsons is in there, Vaughn's, and all kind of. This on the right is a map of the station area, and so just so to orient folks, the dot in the center, and I don't have a pointer or anything. I can't really do anything other than kind of gesture that way. But the dot in the center is the Glendora Metro Station. The downward sloping diagonal dashed line going kind of left or right, looks like a train track, is a train track. That's the Metro line. And the white line in the middle is Glendora Avenue, which kind of does that jog to the west. So that's the village up at the top. Route 66 is the big horizontal white line going, I'm looking at it left or right, going down sort of the lower third. And I mentioned where the village is. And I think really kind of a takeaway, I'm colorblind, but I know the colors. The mauve, red, and sort of brighter colors on this map are, all allow 3 stories by right. So you can build 3-story on any lot, any site within those brighter reds and lavender sort of mauve hues. That zoning's been this way for almost 20 years. So takeaway here are really 2 things. Virtually everything in the study area is zoned for 3 stories anyway currently. City has to plan for around 1,000 units in that area. And I really want to emphasize that the station plan does not add additional units, but rather propose an option or some scenarios to distribute those units to save our commercial sites and limit the impacts on the single-family residential units without sort of running afoul of the state of California. The vision plan showed some scenarios where that could be possible and also keep those sites. So one option is to, we could have done is sort of show 3 stories everywhere, including all over the village, and just sort of do SimCity and show it over Vaughn's and Albertsons and all that sort of stuff. But that was not the goal given to us, was to try to preserve the commercial. So I had this slide in one of the earlier presentations. Some of you may have seen it before, but what is the vision plan, what it's not. So what it is an illustration of what is possible. What it is not is a rezoning. What it is it outlines development vision through various scenarios. What it is not is a regulatory document. Like the general plan is a regulatory document, the zoning code, those things are regulatory. This thing is not. It identifies the regulatory adjustments required to realize those scenarios, if that's what you wanted to do. We do. It is not a specific project, so it's not a plan to build that exact thing on a specific site. It's a description of goals for how growth and development may occur around the Glendora Station over the next 2 decades or so. What it's not is an approval of a specific project or application or something like that. So I thought that was a good slide to sort of clarify some questions people had about it. So I'll talk briefly about public engagement. In addition to all the plans and city documents that I talked about, the strategic plans, there was 2. All of those had public processes and meetings in their own separate processes. The Glendora Station Plan itself went through a year-long, multifaceted public engagement effort, including in-person and virtual open houses, booths at Earth Day, mailers to all property owners of record in the planning area that I showed you, social media, which I'll talk about some specific analytics, a website. We built a specific website for it, and now there's one on the city's page, and multiple planning commission and city council meetings, including tonight. And there's videos on the current website that we have on the city page for the Glendora Station Plan, with videos of the meetings and some of the open houses, staff reports, all kinds of really the plan itself, and all these, the maps and things I showed you are all in there as well, including the presentations. So this next slide is going to be that. So this is just some of the stuff, some of the handouts and things that we had, and some high-level overview of some of those meetings. This is a slide that just shows some of the different channels that we had in terms of public engagement. So it's kind of a graphic of the different channels. I'll highlight that the city, used social media extensively in this process. So on the next slide, I kind of go into that more. But in these numbers, I've updated these since since today because people continue to look at our Facebook and Instagram pages and stuff. So as of today, the stationary vision plan meetings and survey have received over 27,000 views on Instagram, including 77 shares and over 6,000 views on Facebook, and then 213 impressions on Nextdoor. So for tonight's town hall, so the next slide, tonight's meeting, this is doubled since I started this slideshow last week. So tonight's meetings received over 11,000 views, so exactly twice that on Instagram, 1,600 views on Facebook, and 277 Nextdoor impressions. So if you add all that stuff together, the vision plan related items have had almost 40,000 views on Instagram, and 7,500 plus views on Facebook and growing, and 500 Nextdoor impressions. Quite a bit. So also in 25, the city pushed out a community opinion survey, which I want to emphasize was statistically valid, an independent assessment. It highlighted, a Glendora a community that's both engaged and forward-looking. But some numbers that were we pulled out of there was that 64% of the respondents of that survey support diverse housing types near transit. 72% of the respondents believe long-term planning for housing and infrastructure is essential. 73% rate the city positively for communication and engagement, and 84% rated overall quality of life as good or excellent. And there was the sort of margin for error of this survey was like 3-ish%, so like 3.5%. So you could add or subtract 3 or 4% from any of those numbers. That doesn't go one way, but that's the sort of statistical margin for error, so that those numbers could deviate from the entire population of the cities, if we were to survey everybody in Glendora. So, why you might see taller buildings around the station, regardless of our local zoning. So, again, a high-level overview here, but to sort of set this up, I need to define, and I mentioned this earlier, what affordable housing means in California and a lot of state laws, as a lot of state programs to increase density and height and local requirements relate to affordable housing. So in 2025, the affordable housing limits in LA County, which we're in, are determined by income categories with specific limits for low, moderate, and higher income households. For reference, I'll switch slides here. The median income in LA County for a 4-person household is $106,600 a year. So about $100,000 a year. Affordable rent limits are calculated using a formula that includes reasonable utility allowances, and they're based on that income. Usually around 1/3 of someone's gross household income can go to housing before it becomes unaffordable or they get what we call housing stress. For owner-occupied units, affordable housing costs must not be less than 28% of the gross income of the household. So there's sort of a floor to it too. So the takeaway here is that despite some misconceptions, I think a lot of affordable housing is reserved for households we probably think of as sort of like working class, that's teachers, cops, city staff, seniors, etc. An interesting statistic that I learned through preparing this presentation was that only about 1/3 of Glendorans today, residents of the city, could qualify to buy the house that they are currently in based upon their income. 2/3 could not. They could not get approved for a loan simply to live in the house they're in. This affects, our future and quality of life, and it's, for many people, it's sort of predicated on when you bought your house. If you got in 20 years ago or 30 or 40 years ago, nowadays somebody couldn't buy that house making anything near the median income. So on the next slide is like a table. I'm not going to read this table, but this shows the income limits, for LA County this year. And as you can see, obviously there's some acutely low, extremely low income households. And, on the left is the income category, and across the top is like the number of persons in the household or dependents you have, like when you do your taxes. So, but as you see, like in that middle, the low income one, I want to kind of highlight that. For like a 3 or 4 person household, we're already going into the 80%, 120,000, 109,000 a year. So, fairly, what I think a lot of people sort of think of as like middle class income levels. So that sort of sets up these hypothetical scenarios. So this is not talking about the vision plan. This is talking about what you could do under the existing zoning today. Like someone could come to the counter, submit an application for this without changing anything. And this is based on state law. So I'll call it scenario A. Under AB Assembly Bill 1763 for sites within 1/2 mile of the Glendora station. If a developer proposes 100% affordable units, so again, looking at that, keeping that previous stuff I talked about in table in mind, this bill grants unlimited density for concessions plus up to 3 extra stories or 33 feet in height. So I mentioned 3 stories is what the zoning allows now. So if you get 3 extra stories or 33 feet, you're pretty much at 6, you're at 6 stories. So 5 to 6 stories is already allowed under the state laws. AB 2097, which I talked about, is the one about parking. We could not require minimum parking standards of that development. Most do because they want to rent units when they come in. So, and a lot of times we've heard that like lenders for large developments won't give the developer the money if there's no parking. Transit, we're not that transit rich. We're like completely parkingless or unbundled is what they call it in the jargon. Developments really make sense. You might see that like in downtown LA or, you know, Denver or San Francisco or something, but not here. But they could if they wanted. The result then is that buildings, you know, an existing 3-story base height limit, a developer could legally reach 6 stories with, you know, no required parking if that were to come in, subject to objective standards, and our building safety codes would still apply. So that's, affordable housing is different than subsidized housing. So the next one is going to be, I'll call it example or hypothetical scenario B. And this talks about another sort of hypothetical things. And these are not real applications here. So these are just things based on state law. So again, starting with the 3-story base zoning, which I talked about, if a developer proposes the required percentage of affordable units under the law, they can earn a 50% density bonus under AB 2345, and in some cases, an additional 50% stack bonus under AB 1287. Sometimes these are like cumulative with the different bonuses. You know, if any height or step back limits that we have preclude those number of units they can hit under those bonus density laws, then the applicant under government code 65915E lets the applicant request a waiver to those height limits or setback limits, which is like the edge something could be from the property line, to hit that density. So again, they can go taller. Don't need to mention the parking thing again. So, you know, this would often lead to a situation where if a developer wanted to invoke those state laws, they could get up to 5 or 6 stories to fit the density bonus law. I mentioned SB 79. We already talked about that, but if that passes, whether the governor signs it or not, it will pass. The only way it doesn't is if he vetoes it. But that allows 6 stories near transit and like 100-ish units per acre as well. It sort of takes all these things and wraps them up into a new umbrella, sort of streamlines it. So, you know, I think it came up at the last meeting. If there's a vacant lot or any lot within this area, it can be redeveloped according to the zoning, and many of those lots can have 3 stories built on them now, and some taller if it was some affordable development. There's no way to really stop that other than like buying the lot, not developing it, and or keeping it the same. So, you know, that's the market really dictating that, not so much the city, because again, it's much the state and state laws that sort of prevail over us. Current planning is seeing more and more applications come in with a modest affordable component. So some percentage, so like somebody comes in with this, we want to build 50 units, some percentage of those are often going to be affordable at some category so that they can get some sort of density bonus and or waivers, because the developers are wise to these different laws, and as they learn more about them, they're sort of invoking them when they come to the counter or submit an application electronically to the city. So kind of getting near the end here. So again, I appreciate your patience. We're not completely helpless and at the mercy of the state entirely. There are things the city can do and can control and does. So the big one is objective design standards for architecture. And this includes transitions, entries, you know, the way something looks and feels, materials for new buildings. We have been working on that for 3 years now, and it's actually going to be going to hearing next week. And that can require buildings to meet like our local character or design standards. The state's mandated that it's against the law to apply anything that's not objective standards or to new housing developments. Another thing the city is working on is circulation and safety. So first, last mile projects, things like protected bike lanes, crosswalks. You see that all around here. Sidewalks, safe sidewalks. to make the station access safe and predictable. We work on those sorts of things. Traffic calming measures. The city does have control where it can over street and parking management in the public realm, like on the public right of way. So even when we can't require minimum parking standards, we can manage like what happens along the curb. We can create shared pooled parking areas. We can sort of establish what's called TDM or transportation demand management policies. So things like, for projects that go to planning commission or city council, those could be things like requiring bike lockers. Even I've seen even ones where it's like they require employers to have like changing rooms and showers so that people can ride bikes to work. Stuff to offset car usage. And then I mentioned public realm. The city can work on plazas, trees, lighting, standards for that. Activation near the station to support small businesses in the village and make it a safe, nice place to walk and, not help offset traffic. Because one of the things I didn't talk a ton about here is much of the concern isn't just height and density, but it's also the sort of traffic that people associate with different, denser, more intense development. So commitments on outreach and notice. The city has made, commitments on outreach and engagement. So, for any implementing actions for the Glendora Station Area Vision Plan, they come back to like council or commission. Things like code updates, specific plans, design standards. And again, I'm pretty clear that it's not development that meets all the requirements of the zoning code. We'll use mailers, e-blasts, multi-language notices, plus, our online social media tools, webpage and open houses and things to engage folks in a conversation about it in a transparent manner. The city will publish plain language summaries of what a given action does or doesn't do, kind of like the slide I showed you earlier, entitlement versus rezoning or something like that, and how residents can weigh in or be involved in the process. Really important is that work on a new general plan, so the big constitution or foundational document for development in the city. I mentioned that ours goes back to 2006 and it's called the 2025 plan. We're at the end of that. So that next general plan and major zoning code update will happen over the next 3 to 5 years, including eventually leading into a new housing element, so the next 8-year cycle, incorporating future housing numbers from the state. We've already started work on our request for proposals for the general plan, so that process will start in earnest, we think, next year. The last step of a general plan is updating all the different zoning and implementing actions, and that will take a few years after. So this process, I say 3 to 5 years, this will go into the 2030s to fully implement the next housing element and general plan. There will be multiple opportunities for public engagement, open houses, all those things that I mentioned as part of that process, and those are regulatory documents, importantly. A large amount of public engagement activities and involvement. It would probably be a significant part of the budget. I think I didn't really mention this, but the Glendora Station Area Vision Plan was like a $200,000. It was a grant, so it was a grant for Metro. Around 40,000 of that went into public engagement or for materials for the different open houses and meetings. So as you can imagine, with the general plan and housing element, it'll be a huge part of the budget. So in conclusion, there's a bunch of sources. This slideshow will be on the website, so you can take pictures of it, but you'll be able to see it on the website and click on these. These are hyperlinks. So these are citations, particularly to state housing laws. The online version, you'll be able to click on them and open things. So I realize you can't do that on a PowerPoint. So in summary, the truth is that the Glendora Station Area Vision Plan isn't going to be the vehicle that brings taller buildings to the station area. It's really a myriad of state laws and some local policy decisions. When we update our general plan and housing element over the next 3 to 5 and then some years, there will be a lot of opportunities for public engagement, involvement, meetings such as this, to make sort of big, high-level, comprehensive decisions about what can go where and about locally, where different types of development can be concentrated in the city on sort of a macro or city-wide scale, not like a site-specific scale. So I think with that, I'll thank everybody for their patience. I know it was a lot of stuff, a lot of information, and I'm happy to open it up to questions and discussion. And I think you've probably heard me talk long enough here, so appreciate your time.
Thank you, Hans, and enjoy a swig of jet fuel there to recover.
That's a much better reception than we thought we were going to get
Yeah.
this presentation. So I appreciate that, everyone.
I'd like to ask the first question and just a definition, and staff can certainly address this, just to add another piece of information. As we saw about affordability, affordability clearly does not imply no to low or subsidized housing. Affordable, but we saw what affordable means. No, my wife and I cannot afford to buy our home again today. I fit that category big time. That's a reality. But if a developer chooses to pick one of those percentages as an affordable factor in their development, they're obligated to something because of that choice of affordability. Isn't there a covenant that goes with that hangs with the property, that kind of a boat anchor on that door, if you will? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so for affordable housing, if the developer wants to take advantage of density bonuses, it requires that if the unit that they're building is going to be for sale, in other words, someone's going to buy the unit, have a mortgage on it, the covenant requires that the property remain affordable for 45 years. So the current owner and subsequent owners have to sell it to a qualified income person at a qualified price for 45 years. If it's a rental unit, the state law requires that the covenant be in place for 55 years. So that covenant would have to keep the unit rent restricted as people that fall within the required income bracket for 55 years.
Thank you. So that prevents the developer from coming in, taking all the advantages and exceptions, and then turning it into fair market value quickly. So that's a protection on our part, which impacts the level of percentage that a developer may choose to declare in an overall development. And housing unit means doors, doesn't mean single family or blocks building. If it's 30 units in the building, that's 30 housing units. Okay, with that, anything else? I will open up to, if you raise your hand, Mr. Raymond will come see you with the microphone. Again, if you choose to not speak to the microphone, do exercise the little note cards. And our intent is to address all of the questions this evening. So,
If anyone does have note cards or you would like one and have them written down, Mark and Moises will walk around and grab those. We have one question back here first, if you don't mind. Sort of talk show rules. The microphone stays with me. I'll hold it out because else you never get it back.
Can you explain how it will be monitored, how low-income affordable housing is monitored so that it stays affordable housing for 55 years?
So typically that responsibility would fall upon the city, depending on the financing for the project. If it's a for sale property, like if the covenant is associated with a unit that is for sale, and so far all of the developers that are currently taking advantage of density bonuses are for sale builders. The city will record a covenant on the property when the property sells that requires that the property, so there's a covenant recorded against the property. And so if the property is sold in the future, then the title company or escrow would notify the city that the property is being sold, and the city would have to qualify the prospective buyer and verify that the sale price is within the requirements of the state law. If it was a rental unit, the city would also record a covenant against the property, and we would we have there's a couple of developments in the city that are rental projects that the city currently has covenants on, as well as owner-occupied units, but most of them are covenants, or a lot of them are covenants we have on rental projects that were built many years ago in some cases. We do annual monitoring of those, so we actually verify, go through files at the the rental manager's office, and we have to verify that the units that are restricted to low income are being rented to qualified households by income, and also that the managers and owners are charging appropriate rents that fall within the income category.
I noticed that we have some areas near the village that are historic in the historic district, would that be exempt from somebody coming in and buying like 4 homes in the historic district and building a huge apartment building? Or if the house itself is considered historic, would that prevent that from being torn down to put a new unit in and so forth?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. So first question
Good
is,
day.
where is the historic district? And without having a map of there, the city about 30 years ago, I think it was close to 30 years ago, did designate a largely residential area which is east of Glendora Avenue and largely south of Foothill. And it's all residential. It doesn't include any area within is the historic district here?
There's a pointer actually.
Oh, okay.
That doesn't
You
work on
wanna-
the screen. Doesn't work on the screen.
So, yeah. So it's basically the historic district is largely the area east of City Hall and south of Foothill between Glendora over to kind of it jogs in and out, but all kind of over to Minnesota. And that includes, it's got a mix of older, like pre-war single family homes and some apartments mixed in. I don't know.
There's only one historic district in
Yeah,
a
there's all,
small area.
so that's the only historic district in this designated historic district.
There are some properties that are also historically listed, scattered around. Not as many as you would think for the first city like ours. Most people didn't choose to be on the registry, and so there's far less than you'd imagine for a town like us.
And in the village itself, when I say the village itself, I'm talking about the area on Glendora Avenue between Foothill and Bennett. I believe that there are only one or two buildings, that are on the historic list, and that would be the Andrews Building and the Chance Building. I think those are the only two that are designated landmarks in the village, or what I call the village. In terms of the protections, like, I believe that there are some protections for historic districts, under some of the density bonus laws, but there is something.
But we are getting ADUs, for instance, in the historical zone, where several have been ADUs being built, multiple units. So that doesn't stop that necessarily. You're getting, the neighborhoods are starting to change. The ADUs and SB9s, multiple units.
Yeah, I'll just add that, like, previously, a couple of years ago, you could still, if somebody had a historic house and they wanted to do an ADU, it would go through a hearing, like, to sort of review the design, and we can't even do that anymore. So the design, we can look at the design and try to make it match the house through our objective standards. It's one of them. But so yes, you'll see change happening in these areas.
You guys ready for another question? All right.
Hi there. As a resident of Glendora for about 30 years, I had previously lived in Los Angeles, and that line, the A line, directly comes from Los Angeles, and I've seen a lot more vagrants coming over and being harassed, people harassing our community in a not a good fashion. And I'm just wondering about the crime factor on that subject.
Well, Captain.
So there are a variety of different aspects that increase or decrease crime rate. Bringing in the A line doesn't necessarily increase crime. It does increase the amount of people that come into our city using that public transportation. But there are ways that we can mitigate that. There are ways that we can address it. I don't know that public transportation is necessarily going to cause that increase. The A line's been operating since about a week and a half now. Haven't seen any updated or increased crime rates there. With respect to increased housing density, it's pretty complicated. Simply because you have increased housing density doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily see an increase in crime rate. Crime rate is often associated with socioeconomic factors and the increased ability to remain anonymous when you are going to commit a crime. Adding additional residences and units doesn't necessarily increase anonymity or the ability to commit a crime and be successful with it. I will tell you that your police department is committed to maintaining public safety, and we do that through a variety of different ways, if that answers your question.
I own a commercial building in Arcadia, and I think Glendora so far does a much, much better job with vagrants and so on. But it is really not good in the city of Arcadia. And that transit center is the major reason. So you've got Albertsons here, you've got a beautiful downtown north, and I would just hope Glendora PD would remain proactive and not allow camping on the sidewalks and so forth. I have seen graphic evidence of homeless here on Glendora Avenue, just above Ed's place. That was about a month ago. City came out, cleaned it up right away. My other question is eminent domain in play here? For instance, those businesses, here Ace Hardware, according to what I see, no more. It's going to be apartments. All those businesses on that west end of the shopping center over toward Vermont, is that going to be an eminent domain situation, or just the existing owners are selling the property?
Sure. Do you want to talk a little bit about the authority and the excess surplus property?
Yeah, so the property on you're talking about property on Vermont? Yeah.
Apartments?
No, not the Ace Hardware property. So Ace, there's the shopping center, and it's all owned by one company that owns the Ace Hardware building, the Albertsons building, and some of the other commercial within the center that really has doors that front into that parking lot. And that owner has no interest in, wants to keep operating it as a center. Albertsons has a very long-term lease there. They're not doing anything with that property. Their intention is not to do anything but maintain it as a shopping center. There is property that fronts on Vermont that includes what was called the Action Stamping Building, if people are familiar with what I'm talking about. So that property, along with where the parking lot is for the metro station, that was all acquired by the Gold Line Construction Authority at the time that the rail was being built. The Construction Authority has turned over the parking lot to Metro. LA County Metro now owns the parking lot. But the Construction Authority is in the process of, and they've put an RFP out to builders to sell the Action Stamping Building to a builder. As part of that, I believe that they're probably in some sort of escrow. The builder has actually submitted an application to the city to develop 86 three-story townhomes on that property.
Correct. 13 of which would be affordable.
And right, and as a condition, because it's publicly owned property, right? You have the Gold Line Construction Authority is a entity that's a public agency that was created by the state to build the Gold Line. It's subject to what's called the Surplus Land Act. So when a public agency sells any land for surplus like this one, it has to reserve a certain percentage for low and moderate income housing units. So in this case, the state, as part of the sale, agreed with the Construction Authority, I believe it's 15% of the units to be sold for low income households of the 86. So what do you mean by eminent? So are you asking, is the city of Glendora going to use its power of eminent domain to acquire and assemble property for development? Is that the question? The answer to that is no. I think for many years there's been I think a misconception about how local governments in particular use the power of eminent domain, and it's used extremely rarely. In my 30 years of working in local government, I've been involved in 2 eminent domain cases. Neither of those were in the city of Glendora. They were in other cities, and they were in both cases used to resolve. One was used to resolve an ownership issue when the city wanted to acquire property, and the other one was used to resolve a tax liability issue on the property owner. Cities, I think it was viewed that cities, local governments like or used this power willy-nilly or threatened people all the time that we were going to acquire assembled property. That's not something that happened. I'm not aware that Glendora has ever used its power of eminent domain to acquire land for development at any point in its history. That's certainly not in the last 20 to 30 years at least. So that's not something that the city really has the ability to do or has any plans to undertake at any time in the future.
One more back here, and we'll move forward.
Okay. One thing I wanted to know is, or not know, there's a couple comments I have. One is, based on the map and knowing where the train station is, I live in the area, so I walk around this area all the time. I'm around here. One thing I really want to see is transit from our station to the village. So like a bus line that goes to the village that gets people, because I've seen in Monrovia, Arcadia, other places where you have to walk a mile or half a mile just to go anywhere. There's nothing around the area. And I think it's a waste of our taxpayer money not to do that, to get people into our businesses, to get people spending from out of town, to really kind of make Glendora a destination where people want to go, not just people who live here to do things. That's one thing I really wanted to mention on that. Also, with a lot of these areas, there's a lot of parking lots. And I'm thinking like, how can we use some of the parking lots to make transit? Because I go to Albertsons a lot. That parking lot is never full. How can we use some of those parking spaces that we aren't using for housing to really make this area like a really great place to live? And one thing too is I really appreciate that you kind of have this map here. This is where we want to build. This is what we want to do. And this is the area. And I think that's a fantastic way to show residents that we're not just going to bulldoze every house here. We really are focusing on where we can build, where we want to build, and build a Glendora that I think is going to work for everybody. And I just wanted to commend you guys on the work that you've done on all these presentations, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
For the improvements, Moises, were you going to speak on that?
Yeah, just to answer his first question about transit services from the station to the village and kind of the surrounding area. We, recognizing that the A-line operation was going to begin, in September, we actually did shift our shuttle service, our transit service, the big orange buses, if you've seen them, to basically stop at the station and do a bigger loop that brings it back through the village. So that operation actually started on September 22nd, so it's been in operation for about a week, recognizing exactly what you said, which is to provide a low-cost transit service to get people from the station to the village as quickly as possible for those that don't want to walk from those couple blocks.
The zoning allows mixed use, it allows commercial. So if the developer so chooses to do that in the future, as these sites evolve, that's a possibility. I don't know what the market will bring.
Hi, I got a couple of questions and about businesses that may be going away. On Foothill Boulevard, west of Glendora, I drove by there looking at a map, and there was a lot of businesses there, including the jiu-jitsu place, the health clinic. There's a nail salon. There's a Domino's Pizza. The dialysis center, 99-cent store, and across Vermont is Brian Wood. And then there's going further west on Foothill, there's a health food store, Foster's Freeze, sports card place, the Noarm building, alarm building, Pilates studio, the dairy drive-through. Are all these businesses going away to put buildings, apartment buildings on?
So and that, you're right, so that whole stretch in that area was part of the station area plan. We identified several of those locations you're talking about as where housing could be built. Right now, the area, part of it is zoned where housing could be built. The corner across the street where the 99-cent-store dialysis center, that is currently zoned. Housing could be built there if the owner chooses to do that. Further west, like the Foster Freeze, where the karate studio is, and some of those other businesses further west, is only zoned commercial right now. So, again, this was sort of a vision conceptual plan as to how would we fit, the housing units that we sort of theoretically planned for, and so that's a theoretical possibility if the owners want to do that. They could submit applications to develop housing, but we don't have any applications right now on those sites.
Okay, so how farther down Vermont to Route 66? The car wash is gone. All the donut place is gone. That's next to the Ace Hardware. It's just a lot of stuff. There's a preschool building that's by the stamping building, the stamp shop. Action. So those are going to go away as well.
So I can tell you that we do not have any applications for development on any of those properties. I can tell you that I've just came back from a shopping center conference where I actually spoke with the owners of two of those shopping centers, who do not have any plans to do anything but maintain them as commercial currently. It takes the property owner to actually want to do that, and a builder to come in and buy the property and develop it. The city cannot force that to happen through zoning or any other mechanism.
Jeff, if I just may, I think it's really important to reiterate time and time again that currently and for the past 20 years in that area, if someone wanted to put mixed use or housing in that area, they could.
In most of that area, yeah.
Correct. So this isn't a new idea for housing in these areas. In fact, most of it's been around since 2002.
Yeah, 2003 when the zoning for that area changed to mixed use.
Also, the one of the bills that I mentioned talked about how affordable housing is allowed by right in commercial zones. So that's been on the books for, what was it, 2017, or one of those bills was that. So that could have happened prior as well for that.
So is there any other place, does everything have to be done within a half a mile of the station? Glendora goes all the way down to Arrow. Is it possible to put some of the housing down there so we don't have to clog up our city with 6-story buildings and traffic?
So we only looked at, within the station area, we only looked at, so we have actually, through the Hans referenced the regional housing needs assessment, the 2,200 or almost 2,300 units that the city had to plan for. And those 2,300 units are spread all throughout the city, including some of the areas like down on Arrow that you referenced. There's a lot of units on Arrow that we distributed. There's a lot of units on Route 66. Within the quarter to a half mile area, there are 1,000 units that are planned for. Of that, nearly 3,000 units, there are 1,000 units planned in the station area. So this study was trying to look for ways that we could accommodate those 1,000 units within that quarter to a half mile area where there are already that many units planned.
Does it have to be 1,000 units in that area?
It is. That's already been adopted as part of the housing element.
So you couldn't put 2-story apartment buildings there. They have to be minimum 3 or 5 if the builder wants.
So right now, if it is a designated
Jeff, do you mind backing up a little bit further with the housing element?
Yeah.
The state requires in terms of base density and why 3 stories is about the lowest you can go.
Right.
So
for the city long ago designated its greatest densities around the future station. This goes back 25 years when the city first did that. Under the housing element, when you designate a housing site as part of your housing element, which when we adopted it, you have to ensure as a city that it's not underdeveloped. And if you allow it to be underdeveloped, you have a problem with your housing element. So really the state law requires is for us to be compliant is that if you have a maximum 30 units per acre, and 30 units per acre is typically a 3-story development type, you can't allow it to be developed for any density less than 80% or 24 units to the acre.
even if you put them down on Arrow or, you know, down away from the village.
Well, like I said, we've done that. We've done that. Of those 3,000 units, there's 3,000 distributed all over the city. Only 1,000 are within the area around the station. So only a portion of the 3,000 are within the area around the station.
Another question is, would you put any meeting notices in the water bill so we all know what's going to be discussed at the next meeting, city council meeting?
We looked at that, and for the timing of this and the urgency for it, to wait for the water bill process was not going to accomplish what we wanted to do for this time frame. But absolutely, those can be if we have longer range plans for the meetings. Okay?
And part of the other challenge with the water bills is we don't serve every residential customer, so that we still have a gap there too. So it is definitely an option that we do utilize. Mark.
If I might jump in on something here, one of a Davidism is words mean things. Okay, so we have to be cautious here. The RENA number is a state-directed plan for create opportunity that if the right pieces came together, you could achieve this number of doors. Does not mean you have to build it. Just means plan for and zone, and we have done that, identifying sites throughout the community, including around the station area. Three things need to happen. You have to have a property owner that is looking to sell. You have to have a buyer that wants it more than the property owner does it. And then you have to have somebody that their reason to buy it is they want to come develop these doors or this housing thing. So we need to be cautious when we say this is coming or that's going to happen or those businesses are going away. All three of those elements have to come into place before the businesses down Foothill might leave or the car wash might leave. There has to be a market demand and an interest to create that. So this is just a vision to say, gosh, that's a terrible word, but it's a vision to say, this is what conceivably could happen with these property inventories in these sites as a well-planned item, as opposed to build what you wish. And I think our neighbors in Arcadia, the gentleman mentioned Arcadia, for 40 years they allowed mansionization with no control. Okay? They're grumbling loud about letting that happen. They're trying to regroup. This is a plan for a long distance to prevent that type of a build what you want where it is type of environment. So just because it's a vision and a map of possibility doesn't mean tomorrow the shovels are out there and you're going to start seeing sticks go up. You don't know that yet.
I just wanted to clarify one point that Jeff made about the applications and process. We do have, of the 8 applications we have right now, they're either in preliminary concept review or entitlement review stage in the city. 2 of the 8 are within this quarter-mile area. We mentioned the action stamping building, that site, that site's being looked at. We already mentioned that one. And the other one, that action stamping building's already empty. That was already there. And then the second one is the old mortuary site on Route 66, the abandoned mortuary site. That has an application going back to the next planning commission meeting for development on that site. So again, but of those 8 sites we're currently working on, 2 of the 8 are in the area. All the rest are all in Arrow Highway mostly, and Route 66.
Okay, I've been a resident here for 53 years and law enforcement for 35 prior, and I hate to disagree with the captain, but I have with South Pasadena, Azusa, and the chief of police at APU. I know for a fact in South Pasadena, when the train started going through, their crime rate went up considerably. I know this for a fact. I continue with the information from them, mainly because my son has been there for 31 years. Secondly, I'm not saying that's not going to happen here. The other issue I have is it just seems like there's been a lack of engagement as far as the city council. Part of you say you said you sent out 400 flyers, but I've never seen a report or seen an impact on what those 400 flyers have said. And I've talked to many business people and residents in the area within the half mile and a quarter mile, and they very few of them knew anything about it. The other thing I have is the other question I have is, what are you going to do with 6-story buildings when LA County Fire currently here does not have ladders to reach the top of these roofs? It's a real concern, considering that they barely can reach a 3-story building. So you're going to have to work closely with the LA County to bring in that type of equipment. It can't be sitting in the city of industry or down in Irwindale to be able to get here, because they have a hook and ladder down there. I have some recommendations. I think you need to publish all the survey results, comments, and petitions. Prioritize public safety and infrastructure. Protect local control over land use. Require mailed notices, and just by using the utilities bills. I know for a fact, I've checked with many cities in the area. They use their utility bills to send out special notices or special information to their citizens. I'm not saying you could do it, and I know you couldn't have done it now because of this, but you still can use that. The other ways required commission a third-party audit of outreach methods, provide quarterly public updates, just slow down the rezoning, slow down this process a little bit. A lot of this is not even going to go in effect until 2029. And the thing is that I know about you got to have a certain amount of done by a certain amount of time and all that, but there's ways of slowing things down. And my concern is that there's an appearance that rezoning has already started, and it really allows the building to start way before this process is even starting. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but it just gives, there's an appearance of that we're rushing into something that we need to maybe just step back, take a pause, get more people involved with what's going on. Thank you.
We have one question in the back. Moises, you had a written question. Do you mind reading that written question or reading that right now and answering that? And sure. I'm going to go back here, sir, and then I'll be right back to you.
So what happens to existing single-family homes in the red zones?
So within the identified area, all of the area is either within the Route 66 specific plan, or there is a small section actually to the west. Actually, that's R2, isn't it? So there are no I don't believe that there are any single family zones in the colored zones.
Hey, Jeff, do you mind walking through that, even though we'll blame Greg for this? Even though there's too close. All right. Even though there are single-family homes, it may not be single-family residential zoning. Do you mind going into that a little bit? I think that'll help clarify that question.
Yeah, you're right. In some of the areas, while there are single-family homes, it's particularly kind of for those of you who aren't colorblind, some of the orange areas sort of west of Glendora, south and north of Foothill. Those are multiple family zones. In some cases, there are single family houses on them just because they're older areas. And, 100 years ago when they were first built, somebody put a single family house on it. But over the years, it's been upzoned, and now you see apartments and other types of things mixed in. And that could happen with those houses as well.
To expand on the previous gentleman's question about the fire, is the city also looking at increased city and fire services for all of these people? More people means more emergencies, and we'd like to keep our response times favorable for everyone.
Right, I should have answered the fire question also for construction. So it is, maybe it's exaggerating slightly, but not much. But nowadays, particularly after the recent fires, you can't build a doghouse in this city or anywhere in LA County without getting approval from the Los Angeles County Fire Department. And in Glendora, the city doesn't provide fire services directly. You are all enjoy being part of the Los Angeles County Fire District. Every single new commercial and residential structure that is of any kind, a garage, an addition to your house, now every single one is not only reviewed by the city for code compliance, but is also reviewed by the LA County Fire Department. And that includes a fire flow test, to make sure that there's adequate fire flow from the hydrants to fight fires as they occur to the LA County fire standards. That meets the LA County Fire Code for building, and also that they have resources in place, like they have 3 stations here and others to fight fires should they occur. So we don't issue a permit for anything, which creates great frustration for many people trying to do projects without the approval of Los Angeles County Fire Department.
I have a question regarding the gentleman in the black shirt when he was talking about, if I heard correctly, something about price control, rent control. 55 years, whatever. Could you elaborate on that? Because the question I have as a retired certified appraiser is that who would want to invest with a ordinance that limits any form of price increase? So I stand to be corrected because I may misinterpret it, but could you elaborate on the two?
Sure.
Jeff, do you mind going into a little bit about tax credits and the complication that's affordable housing?
Sure. So what to explain, so if in California, under state law, in order for a unit to be qualified as a low income or restricted rent unit for purposes of getting a density bonus and for other things, the owner or builder of the property has to agree to record a covenant against the property that for 55 years that unit shall be rented to an low income qualified family at a restricted rent. In most cases, developments that involve low income units receive financing through government programs like the Federal Home Program, like federal tax credits and other public financing to defray or compensate for the issue that the appraiser was talking about. When projects like that are bought, built, and sold, it's understood that those are low-income projects, low-income developments, or developments with at least a portion that are low-income units, which affect their market rate. So anytime those projects would be sold, they're likely only going to be purchased by an investor or investors who are in the low-income tax credit business or understand what they're buying. The properties that we have right now in the city that have that kind of financial arrangement, there's the Elwood Apartments, which was largely constructed through tax credit financing and as well as federal financing that is targeted to producing low income or restricted income units. So that is baked into the way those projects are developed and to the covenants that get recorded against the property and take into account the value of the land and so forth as those properties are financed and pro forma out by the builder.
Jeff, while we're on topic, do you mind talking about the other affordable housing projects in the city as well?
Sure. So over the past, since the early 80s, the first development that the city participated in with the school district, former school site, was the Glendora Gardens Apartments, which is just north of the village. That is a 100% Section 8 development that is for seniors that was constructed around 1980-81. and that was a former school site. That was a partnership between the city and the Glendora School District. After that, the next development in the early 90s was the Glendora Senior Apartments. It's about 155, I think 157 apartments that were built on the former Glendora. There used to be an open field. And of the 157 units, there are just over 50 of those units are rent restricted to low and very low income seniors. After that, the next development of any consequence that was developed that is rent restricted are the Elwood Apartments, which were completed around 2009. It was finished, and that's a 3-story podium-style apartment development in the corner of Elwood and Route 66, and there's about 85-ish units out there. And those are rent restricted for 55 years to low and very low income households. The city has also participated in a Habitat for Humanity for sale project, and there are a handful of first-time homeowner loans that the city has made over the years to market-rate single-family homes in the city, scattered throughout the city, and there are a few new developments coming online that will include a number of moderate-income rent-restricted units. The first coming online under construction when it starts will be a vacant lot at the end of it's at Woodland in San Jose. It's some city property that was the council elected to sell that it wasn't using, and there will be about 41 units out there in total. 7 of those will be restricted to moderate income buyers, and there are a few other projects that are just in the initial stages or beginning construction or beginning the entitlement process, where you're going to have some for sale units that are kind of scattered on Route 66 and as well as Arrow Highway.
Thanks, Jeff.
Kind of going back to, you said there was 2,276 units that needed to be met for our city housing requirements, and 1,000 of those are going to be in this half-mile area versus the 19 square miles. And that's state mandated?
That's what
that number?
That is, this is mandated by the state of California.
It's not mandated that we actually realize that development or that development actually occurs. It's just that the city is required by the state to allow for that potential. So this doesn't mean that there's going to be that number, the 2,000 number.
So those units, so back in when the city was formulating its 21 to 29 housing element, so we were given that number to plan for. And if you want to go on the city's website under community development, you could look at the current housing element, and there is the housing element sites inventory. And you can look and I see where all of the housing sites the city identified when the housing element was adopted back in 22.
You provide a little more clarification, and I think part of the question was, in addition to the total units, there happens to be 1,000 of those mandated. Do you just want to talk a little bit about how the rezoning was largely done around Route 66 and Arrow Highway, and it just happens that 1,000 of those units happen to be in this area?
Right. So of the about 2,300, the majority of the housing sites, or a lot of the housing sites, are within the half-mile area. As part of our housing element update, because we had a problem achieving or finding locations for those almost 3,000 units, we had to do a little bit of upzoning on Route 66 and on Arrow Highway as well, and those areas were largely between the area on the south side of Route 66, between Pasadena and Glendora Avenue, as well as running south down to Colorado. We rezone those areas to residential, to mixed use actually, so you can do either residential or commercial there. As part of the housing element update to meet our RENA overall, and we increase density a little bit on other places, and as well as on Arrow Highway too.
I want to just jump in really quickly and mention something too, because I said this at different points during the presentation, and it's come up. We've had a lot of conversations about the Glendora Stationary Vision Plan, housing element, RENA numbers. some of these we're using for mental math. So, we say 1,000 units, 1,000 units. The actual number at the 10 housing sites, so there's 10 that Jeff was talking about in this half-mile radius, is 1,283 units. So because it's being recorded, the number is 1,283, so almost 1,300 units. So the 2,276 to be precise, arena units. The whole city, a little more than half of them actually were in our housing element are shown at the 10 sites within this half-mile transit. So the 80% density number we talked about will get you to about 1,000, but so it's accurate to say roughly 1,000, but the true number is almost 1,300. So
if you're saying it's almost 1,300, then why don't you guys try and reduce it somewhere that's a little more beneficial to the other neighbors in the other straight up Vermont? So I'm not going to agree with it.
I think one of the things that we've talked about a couple times and we need to go over again. So when the state reviews a housing element, it mandates certain levels of density, one of which is about 3 stories and 30 units to the acre. In fact, the city council originally asked staff to propose a lower, less intensified process than what we went through, and the state rejected our application. So do you remember if we went through 3 or 4 rounds with the state before they approved our housing element?
So we did go through several rounds. I think my recollection is 3. There were a lot of conversations back and forth. Kind of the history of the formulation of the housing sites, which we started doing around 2021. The city, I think, for a long time, for a couple decades, has, in anticipation of the A-line coming and other really, frankly, economic development desires. I think the city has long, for several decades, desired to revitalize the area in the village and on Route 66 with more activity, and saw as a way of doing that to introduce vertical mixed-use development with quite a bit of housing, particularly around the station. And so those policies started occurring and developing as early as the late 90s and early 2000s. So by the time we're planning for the 6th cycle housing element, and that number is a big number. I can tell you, so compared to our previous housing element, the units we had planned for in the 5th cycle, the 2014 to 2021 period, was about 650 units, I think. That's my recollection. So everybody in the state was slammed with like twice and 3 times what they had previously had to plan for. So as we started looking at the sites that were available still, as well as how the city had zoned property, and like I said, the city started increasing the density of housing around the station more than 20 years ago. The sites that would achieve the most units that we could plan for are within this half-mile area around the station. So really by default, we have a larger share of units planned in this area. Again, it goes back to what the city has long planned to see for development, for its desires for economic development, getting better stuff and more people to be in and live in the area.
Yeah, but SB 79 is going to change all that.
SB 79, what it does is that it will waive the city's authority it has to approve certain types of development. And it's actually, it's sort of consistent with what the city has done in the past. It places most of its density around the station. SB 79 affects what developers can do in the area around the station itself. So it would be more than what we currently allow for sure if someone took advantage of it. But it's not entirely inconsistent with how the city is, planning the area around the station for land use.
So in the planning side of it, has the city performed a study to see if you guys can even supply? I'm correct in that the city owns their own water, correct?
Yeah, around the station we have a water.
Right, so have you guys done a study to see if we can determine if we have enough water to even supply the house? I mean, we talked about fires.
For the current arena, yes. Yeah, we did.
So you have a study on that already that's saying we can supply another 10,000 people living here in Glendora? without having to make significant improvements to the infrastructure?
We did, so one part of that. So early on, when we were sort of scoping the Glendora Stationary Vision Plan, there was sort of an analysis started. We reached out to LA County Sewer, et cetera, City Water, and looking at the existing infrastructure here based on the RENA number. So again, based on this number, this 1283, just say 1,000. It's easier to say. Housing units based on our average household size, so you could say, hey, that's going to be maybe 3,000 people living here. We know the number of units, the type of development, et cetera. They analyzed, reached out to our water division and also the county, and the existing water lines in this half-mile area. I mean, sure, if you're going to put a big apartment, 6-story building in, there's going to probably be some upgrades, and as you tap into these lines and things like that, necessitated. But the bottom line is the existing capacity for water and sewage in this area is adequate to serve the number of dwelling units and people that if that full build out.
So does the city have the funds? Does the city have the funds to be able to pay for those requirements right now for those buildings? And if not, is it going to be through the rumored $200 million bond measure?
Can't comment on the bond measure, but do you mind chatting a little bit about the water infrastructure assessment of Moises? Would you mind talking about that, the first assessment that we've done in 25 years?
Sure. I'll start with that and then answer, I think, his question. About a year, maybe a little more than a year ago, we completed and published a comprehensive infrastructure assessment of our water utility. So every piece of pipe, every piece of what we call horizontal and vertical infrastructure was assessed to check on its condition. We have an old water utility, so we have a lot of old infrastructure. The conclusion of that water infrastructure assessment was that we require an additional $350 million worth of investments in that infrastructure over the next 30 to 40 years. So the water rates that you pay includes kind of an assumption that money that is generated will help replace those pipelines. Now, as some of you have seen or experienced personally, some of our pipes are not great shape, and so they regularly burst, and you see our crews out there working to patch that up. Typically, when a development happens, the developer is actually fiscally and financially responsible for upgrading the equipment to meet the minimum water flow demands for that particular project. That doesn't change. So if there's an existing 8-inch line and the hydrology study for that project requires a 12-inch line, they have to put in a 12-inch water line. They have to meet their infrastructure needs. I don't think any developer would, I don't think any person would buy a residential unit that doesn't meet the minimum demands of the building code and what our water utility would require that. So that's one way in which some of that infrastructure is updated and renovated.
All right, we're back here.
What bothers me is the height of these new buildings. If I was a developer and I saw this plan and I saw you could build a 6-floor building, I said, great, but can we limit the first people to a 3-floor? Right away starting off with a 6-floor building.
Do you want to go back over one more time about some of the base density that we have, which is 3 stories, and this isn't, again, a rezoning document. The examples provided by Hans this evening show hypothetical situations under current state law in which developers have a by right ability to build higher than was there. Mayor, would you mind a little bit, not to put you on the spot, during the discussion on the housing element, we knew that additional height could be a potential issue, which is why the city council set the bar for height about as low as the state would allow us to go. Do you mind sharing a little bit about the council's insight?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. We did that with the vision that we don't disagree with you. And while doors and housing is important to one, generate economic development, if you're a businessman in town, I'm sure you wouldn't mind more foot traffic through your front door. That's a great thing. We all agree. What we don't enjoy is the lack of choice and control of what it can look like and how tall it might be. I'm the first one, and I get barked at all the time. The state can do what they want to a point, and I'm saying, maybe not. We need to push back. But we challenge that. So we set the student housing element, and certainly with the objective design standard discussion that was had recently and is ongoing right now, looking to finalize soon. We're being very cautious about what we want us to look like and feel. And I've heard a couple of things. It's the character of the community. Well, you're the character of the community. The buildings are a box, okay? But we certainly want to agree with and like what that box looks like and what it feels like. So if we were to say, hey, let's go to 5 stories, knowing that the state is going to give all these other exemptions and makes it super tall, we don't buy that either, and we're not going to surrender easily. It'll be a tough argument. Be a hard sell. And again, as we also learned, we don't even know if there's a developer market appetite to create that uncomfortable feeling that could be coming.
Thank you, Mayor.
I have a question. Could you clarify whether the affordable housing project has already been fully approved, or if there's an opportunity or opportunities for the community input during the planning and approval process? And also, I don't like to see Glendora to be a second Glendale with tall buildings and, I'm sorry, ugly looking buildings. So I hope you put this in consideration. And the other thing is, have we talked or have we discussed the idea of the 5 million and up homes in North Glendora? How are those people gonna feel about having affordable homes down that street?
Okay, I can address a couple of those, and if I miss something, jump in. First of all, remember, the affordable term is different than low to no income subsidized housing, and I think we all realize that. The examples of affordable housing opportunities that were shared with us, I invite you to go look at the 3 mass ones that have many units. They look pretty nice. They're really nice, well kept. And until I was told by staff a few years ago, I had no idea that those might have been a subsidized or affordable type housing. We've done a wonderful job with that. Do not disagree with you on Glendale. Okay, have many friends in Glendale, but no offense, folks. You want to know what their arena number is? Now you described Glendale, tall buildings. They have a mandate from the state to figure out how to be available to add 23,000 more door units. Okay? Now, our neighbor in Bradbury, nice exclusive neighborhood, they got a whole number of 40. They declared an acre next to their city hall and says, well, if somebody wants to come build it, that'll be there. And they called it easy. My friends in Beverly Hills, and we all think they have all the money and the choice in the world, they did not have a passed housing element. They lost their ability to approve building plans, and the state came in and said, builder's remedy applies. And they're going, oh, what? And they thought, well, we'll just, funny thing, a former mayor says, well, we'll just build a 73-story building in one spot and say, come get us, state, but they're not going to do that either. No, I think that what the people that live in a large estate on the hillside might say to the people that live on Arrow Highway, I don't think that in Glendora that answer is much different. I think the perspective is the same. We want it to look and feel like what we came to Glendora for. And pressing back on the state or choosing how we exercise that will be very important. Yes, ma'am.
But don't you think that this can lower the value of those very expensive homes up in North Glendora?
I don't think it'll have any impact on the price of those homes.
There's actually several articles, I think one in the OC Register that's most prominent, that talks about the home values near affordable housing. And so there was no discernible difference in that article, but we're happy to post that article on our website as well.
I think, too, it's important to recognize helping affordable is different than subsidized project housing of the 40s and 50s in a bigger city west of us. That's a whole different discussion.
All right.
I think we're not looking to go down that path.
I know we're trying to get through several more questions here as we're approaching the 8 o'clock hour. I'm sure all of you have your phones out and have a score update, so we won't bother you with that. Eric, you're up.
Hey, hi, I have a question primarily focusing on action stamping. I know you said that action stamping's not connected with the preschool and Ace hardware side and the donut place and everything. When I was over there, it looked connected to me. I don't know if that's something the owner did to make it look like less randomly placed or something, but there's that observation. I also just can logically foresee a game of dominoes almost. Like once one building goes, then the rest of them will go, because it was denoted as if one wanted to, they could go and build if they wanted to. You know, the door has been opened. And so I want to know in particular what exactly is going on with action stamping. If you know anything more besides the escrow, like the amount of time, like what are we looking at? Is this like 6 months or a couple years or 10 years down the road, you know? And then the other thing is regarding the mortuary on Route 66, there is a veterans plaque from that was donated by the VFW, and I just drove by today and I noticed the flag was still up at the mortuary, which it has been for a while, which is fine. But that seems like it's some kind of a designated monument. You know, would the city encourage that building to keep the facade and remodel the back to kind of keep the same image? Because I think somebody mentioned that the mortuary would be coming up right at the next planning commission meeting. So is there any more information regarding that project as well?
So really quick, if we might, before we go into some of that stuff, I think just important to renote, part of the station area vision plan was really to save some of the commercial that's in there, or to propose a scenario, because for the past 23 years, an entire shopping center could have been housing. So it's not a domino effect insofar as people wouldn't be able to do it. In fact, which is why staff, I think it was yesterday, spoke to the commercial center owner about their future plans for that shopping center. I think as the city's held open houses on economic development and workshops and talked to brokers and business professionals and builders about what they're looking at, it became really clear that, you know, we wanted to save the Vaughan Shopping Center, obviously, the Albertson Shopping Center. And so you could talk a little bit again about the surplus land with the Gold Line Authority, but that shopping center doesn't have any plans for housing, and that comes from them as of yesterday. Okay. So you're going to talk a little about that, and then a quick update on the former mortuary.
Yeah. So as Adam said, so the shopping center, which includes the buildings you described, the Ace Hardware, the Vaughns, the inline stores, the owner of that center, they have no plans to use it for anything but a shopping center. And as I mentioned, some of those tenants, including the Albertsons, have multiple, renewals, leases on their lease going for the next 20 years. So there are a number of their major tenants are locked in. So they don't, and they are a shopping center owner operator. They don't do housing. So their plan is not to do anything but keep that the way it is. And this is, we keep in touch with the shopping center owners in the cities just to kind of, what are you guys up to? What are you thinking? And try to keep tabs on what their desires are. On the Vermont side, with the action stamping building, Warmington Homes has submitted an application to the city. We've provided comment on their application. So now the application has not been deemed complete, meaning they have to respond to that, and they have acknowledged receipt of those comments and are working on responding to it. We don't know what their time is. It could be 1 month, it could be 6 months. we don't know what Warmington's timeframe is, but the fact that they submitted an application strongly suggests, because they've spent money on this and they're assumably in escrow with the Gold Line Construction Authority or some type of letter of intent with that organization, don't know what those terms are, that they will move forward expeditiously. That's our assumption with that property. So we would expect to see something in the not too distant future. But you never know, because crazy things happen in real estate, and sometimes people do things and then you never hear from them again.
I can expand on that, though, that what's proposed on that project is what you're seeing around there. We're a 3-story town, row house type development, 3-story, 86 units. Keep in mind that 86 units is about 24 units an acre around there, which is less than what the vision plan and everything would want for the site. Again, 30 units, 8 acres, and strive and for things, but they would need the minimum build requirement under state law. That's set at 80%. They would, though, even though they're not doing the density bonus, they would be doing affordable units. This is the thing developers are doing, even though they don't do affordable units. A lot of them will build affordable units, not for the density bonus, but to get out of the waivers and requirements of codes, which is this one, and many others will be doing. The other one to keep note is it is a weird thing how the property lines work. While the property does front Vermont, a corner portion of that does integrate into the shopping center. So it's a weird thing, and it was kind of cool how they developed it. But there is a corner that is a different owner than the shopping center that is kind of integrated in.
So the types of housing applications we're getting, Mark is right, is that the market, the market is an amazing thing, right? And it tends to produce an efficiency in the way what it produces for buyers. And the development industry, the way it views Glendora, the type of application we get around the station area, and really pretty much the applications we get along Arrow and along Route 66 are all 3-story townhomes. They're an attached product where you drive into a drive aisle, you have tuck under parking, and then two layers or 2 stories of living above it. That's everything that we're seeing. We're not seeing any interest in. The industry is telling us, to the extent that we're out there talking to builders and other property owners, that there's no that the financing right now for the more dense development, you get 3 to 6 stories or above 4, like an Avalon Bay type development where you're building a structured parking or a podium parking is not in the cards for Glendora anytime soon. That right now it's the 3-level town, which is the most popular thing.
Which is what you're going to be seeing on the mortuary site too.
And on the mortuary site, to answer the question, is the builder intending on saving or preserving any portion of the mortuary or plaques or any sort of other that type of? No, the answer is no. They are not intending on doing that.
That again would be a 3-story townhome, just like the others, with the drive out down the middle with buildings on either side going down that. That one would be 24 units.
I know we're getting tired and we're mumbling on, so I'm going to get to a couple more questions over here, Mayor, if that's okay with you, and see if there's anything back there, and we'll go. Here you go.
Well, I'm one of those taxpayers that's been watching SB 79, and we know that the Senate and the Assembly passed it, and we know that it's sitting on the governor's desk. And we also know that that bill, if it's signed, says that the developers do not have to develop infrastructure. And I know that's what typically happens, but this bill negates that need, and they can build all they want, and they're not going to have to put in sewer or water or any of that stuff. Instead, if that has to be done, it's probably going to happen at the taxpayers' expense, which is you and I, all of us property owners, and Glendora are going to end up funding that if the city doesn't somehow make them do it. But the law, if this gets signed, says they don't have to. So what are we going to do then? We're going to all be footing the bill for that if it's a large structure that has so many thousands of people, and you've already had water problems here in Glendora. So where's that going to leave us as taxpayers with another bond to cover upgrades and fixing all of this that the developer should be having to pay, not us as taxpayers? What are we going to do?
I'll only say on that front. Yeah, I'll just say on that front. So SB 79 introduces a bunch of terms and requirements that have never been introduced in legislation before, so we don't know. The mayor has said a couple. The mayor wants me to turn around here. So here we go. the city sent a couple letters in opposition of SB 79 already. When it passed in both the Senate and the Assembly, we sent a letter asking for it to be vetoed. We join about 200 other cities that will be impacted by this. So part of the difficulty with SB 79 is Glendora would be what we call a tier 2 stop, not tier 1. So the development and some of the requirements are a little bit different. We would still expect that developers would pay for their fair share of public infrastructure. I think one of the things that we share, and to your point, is that as the state has introduced a bunch of additional waivers and requirements of city standards, that we face this ongoing conversation when there's any development that they immediately ask for the city to pay part of the bill. And so our initial reaction is always no, and we send letters to the developers, and then we start that process. And we've even had a couple of developments where the state's housing accountability unit has shown up and asked questions about things like SB 9. And so we are not unfamiliar with that process. I will only say that, and I don't want to speak for the council, I'll let both of these individuals talk if they so choose, but we've really tried to push back on a lot of those requirements, including SB 79. In fact, every piece of legislation that you've spoken about tonight, we've written a letter of opposition against. The city's legislative policy lays heavily into local control and public safety. In fact, we also write a lot of letters for public safety as well. The police department does a great job of letting us know. So to the extent we can push back and make developers pay their fair share, we will absolutely do that. I think the difficulty in what SB 79 and several of the other bills do is they make a lot of the approvals administerial, meaning they don't go to planning commission, there's no noticing requirements, and they don't go to city council, and they put staff responsible, and that's a really uncomfortable position to be in. So we understand the frustration. The council definitely talks to staff all the time about how do we make sure some of this stuff is known. So appreciate your comments on that front, and to the extent possible, we will absolutely push back as much as we can. Mayor, council member, anything else? All right, here we go.
Mike Barron, 31-year resident of Glendora. First, thank you very much for having this session. I've learned a lot from comments from the audience. I've learned a lot from comments from staff and from city council members. So this is the kind of thing I'd like to see for the future. And I would ask the city council to commit to, and not that the whole council is here, but just that there's a commitment that these kinds of discussions will happen in the future when there is another critical timetable event that we get a chance to hear and discuss, because I think that'll help us, support what's right and what's best for the city. I think the tension is the state continues to usurp local control. And sometimes we see, the city's doing this and the city's doing that, when in fact it's state dictates that are forcing the city. So it's good to hear that there's pushback. It's good to hear that there's this attempted management between staying legal with the state requirements and meeting the desires of Glendora residents to maintain what I'll call the character of Glendora. So thank you for that.
Thank you,
One
Mr.
quick
Barron.
question.
Thank you, Mr. Barron, and I believe you can count on the commitment that we will continue that posture of trying to maintain our local choice. And for the record, while Mendel and I are here representing the city, the other three council members were in fact and are in fact in the room to hear what you have to say. So it's not just two sets of ears. The city is also members of large organizations, the California League of Cities, California Contract Cities, Independent Cities Association, all entities working for the city's behalf to maintain local control and voices working with California legislators. So your voice is being heard. We just hope that we can make that difference.
And one quick question. The 1,200 doors, did you say within not everybody's going to ride their bike to the city, and not everybody's going to walk. Are you going to be providing more parking, like behind the where they put the Christmas tree in the center, like behind off of, I mentioned this before, Buena Vista, or what is that, Vista Bonita, because parking's already at a premium with the restaurants putting their dining area in parking spots. What are you going to do with if it's 1,200 doors, everybody's got 2 cars. So you're adding, 22,000 cars, say. Not some people have a bike, but what are you going to do about parking?
So interestingly, you can have an environment like we do where we cannot impose, the city cannot impose parking minimums on developments. And yet the housing developments that we are currently processing in the area that's exempt from parking, the developers are requiring parking for their new homes at almost a rate just barely shy of what our parking standards are. So I think the development community, both the housing and commercial development community, understand and will behave in a way that they still have to build something that their customers will buy and go to. So they know that they have to provide a certain amount of parking for the foreseeable future until, we're less reliant on the car, or who knows, that day may never come. But the market seems to be providing that, at least at some level.
And I'll mention something too. The last 2 cities that I worked at, I've been here a while now, but we're in fairly transit-rich areas. One in particular, we don't have this here in Glendora, but at those cities, they had maximum parking standards. So in addition to minimum, there were maximum. And oftentimes the fight with large developers for multifamily, mixed-use commercial was they wanted to especially medical, wanted to overpark per our maximum standards. So it was kind of this idea, and they said the same thing, that they were having difficulty getting the financing to build their developments. It was contingent on providing a certain parking ratio for whatever the use they were proposing was. So very few, none that I ever remember ever proposed anything that was had no parking at all.
Hold on 1 second. Hello. Hey, all right, here we go. Hold on.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering if we could revisit the objective design standards that you've already been looking at. Maybe we can increase what those standards are to include playgrounds and parking, trees, landscaping, setbacks in those developments that you're going to have. Those kids are going to need a place to play. Glendora is the city of trees, as far as I understand it. Everyone I've ever had come visit me has always mentioned how great Glendora is and all the greenery and all the trees that we have here. I was born and raised here, and it's a great city, and I really hope we can work with what we're being forced to do and make this work for everybody. Okay, thanks.
I would just say on that front, I think the city council gave pretty clear direction to do all those things. To the extent that there are state exemptions or developers don't want to, that'll be the discussion. But city council and planning commission and several of those individuals were here today. All were pretty clear on doing all of those things. So to the extent we can, we absolutely will. Then a couple more questions. Oh, are you sure? Okay.
I have a question for the lady there that talked about SB 79. Would we be allowed for the new developments to do a Melrose for those specific people buying that, like Rosedale did? Or they kind of went broke for a while, so then they added the Melrose into the purchase price of the home or the condominium, whatever they bought. That is my question.
Community facilities district, Melrose taxes is not something that the city's historically done. I'm going to venture to guess that the large real estate community in town was opposed to that. Several of which are represented here this evening. But we've talked about ways that developers could fund infrastructure. It's not something that we have given it much thought of recently because of past direction, but is definitely something that we could entertain as we move forward. So yes, that is absolutely correct. All right. Do we have any more questions? All right, Matt.
So just kind of clarify on the current parking lot for Metro. That is not being considered to build on. It's just the commercial buildings south of that and what used to be certified auto. Am I correct in that assessment or am I incorrect?
At the moment, yes. The only application we have is for the action stamping, what was certified auto and that. The parking lot is, we do not currently have any application for that property. However, and just to be clear, so we're processing one application to the south, action stamping only, not the Vaughn Shopping Center, not that, just action stamping. 86 units. The Metro parking lot, we understand, Metro, LA County Metro has placed that property on their RFP list of properties that they would like to see developed at some point in the future. They have indicated to us that they will entertain development of that site at some point in the future, probably 3 years after they open for service. And that is the extent of the information. But so we anticipate that at some point in the future, the parking lot will be the subject of a development.
Is there anything the city can do to push back and say, basically hold them to their initial plan and make that a parking lot and keep it such?
They, I don't want to speak for LA County Metro, but to the extent that we've had conversations with them, with their staff, and they've indicated that, like, for example, they gave the example of the development that they did in Duarte, where actually they built in the Duarte station, on the Duarte station parking lot for their metro station. They retained basically the spaces that they had committed to in that Duarte lot, and that would remained at their intention to look at that when they built on the Glendora site and others that they plan on building.
And I'd like to mention too that the vision plan that was adopted has very strong language in it. It was amended when it went to city council that it's our expectation and that parking is retained in whatever development happens there for commuters.
Okay, thank you.
And in addition to that issue, Metro has acknowledged that item in their discussion with the parking lot.
Okay. One more question, Mayor, if that's okay with you?
Please.
All right. Okay. We'll take it.
The Metro last newsletter that they put out every Thursday said that they were going to reduce the number of spaces on the Glendora lot, the San Dimas lot, and the Pomona lot by about a third.
So the original design of those parking lots was more than it is now, and so they actually reduced it. The city of Glendora was supposed to have a parking garage. There was a discussion in late 2020, early 21 about this specific thing. The city tried to fight them on the space reduction to provide accurate number of spaces, and so we ended up with surface parking lots in most cities. So that reduction, from my understanding, is already incorporated in the total number of spaces that is there now. So whether or not they build on it in the future and the city has that discussion on replacing all that parking and then some will be the topic of debate, but the current lot as it exists is already about a third less than we were originally promised. Okay. I think we are done with questions, Mayor. Turn it over to you for last comments.
Thank you, Adam. And Mr. Thompson would like to make a few closing remarks.
Just real quick, the baseball score, Dodgers 10, the Reds 2, bottom of the 8th. So if you're going to get home, you better leave now. I just maybe one or two things. I hope that you've been enlightened. I hope that you understand at least a little bit of the truth that the city has to deal with. I want you to know that, as I previously said, we don't always agree with truth. Truth is sometimes hard, and I think you've probably seen that. I'm sure that none of you listen or view some of our local websites because you guys are much more intelligent than that. But a lot of misinformation comes from those websites, and I'll be kind not to call them out. but you all know who I'm talking about. There's probably 3 that come to the top of your minds. And I would just encourage you that if you have questions, you can call any of the council, or you can call any of these guys, or you can walk into City Hall. There's not an armed guard, there's not a secret code. You can call and talk to us and turn off the social media because it only creates drama and negativity. And there's enough of that within the world. We don't need more here. So please trust us. Let's be a partner in all of this stuff. There's going to be probably 10 or 12 or more votes on all of the general plan and all of the changes. Nothing has been done. All of that is just, drama. But please call us up. I've met with some of you. I'm going to meet with more of, you. The council is open, these guys. So let's try to partnership person to person because we all have the same goals here, and that is to keep our city strong and manageable, but growing and keeping up with obvious change. So thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you, Mendel, and a heartfelt thanks for all of the staff, the expertise, the presentation. Um, I learned a lot as well, and I thought every time I hear it, I learn more. So it's wonderful. And to the friends and neighbors, thank you for pressing for this, a great success. I'm glad we did it, and we'll do it as often as needed. So thank you and good night.